True war encounters. Full story. The jungle mist hung thick over the valley floor at 0447 hours, March 1967, somewhere in Quang Tri Province. Staff Sergeant Carlos Hathcock pressed his cheek against the stock of his M1903A4 Springfield, a rifle most Marine snipers had already abandoned for the newer M40. He'd named this rifle Cold Resolve 3 months earlier, etching the words into the wooden stock with a heated knife tip during a sleepless night on fire-base duty. The name wasn't bravado. It was a reminder. When everything around you is chaos, the rifle stays cold, steady, mechanical. You follow its logic, not your fear. 1,600 meters northeast, 8 Marines were dying. Radio intercepts had picked up their final transmission at 0423. Surrounded, estimates 60 plus, dawn attack imminent, unable to break contact. The voice belonged to Corporal Rennie, a 20-year-old from Nebraska who'd shown Hathcock photos of his baby daughter 2 days earlier. Command had already written them off. The terrain was impossible. Triple canopy jungle, no LZ for extraction, NVA reinforcements flooding the area. Protocol said, do not send more men to die. The operations officer, Captain Marsh, had made the doctrine clear during the 0430 briefing. 2 snipers can't break a coordinated ambush, Hathcock. You're wasting both of you. That's not how we employ precision assets. But Hathcock had heard something else in Rennie's transmission, something beneath the static, the exact frequency of desperation he recognized from his own first firefight. He simply loaded his ruck with ammunition, checked the 0 on Cold Resolve's unearthly scope, and moved into the pre-dawn darkness. His spotter, Lance Corporal Burke, followed without question. They'd worked together long enough that Burke understood. White Feather didn't abandon people. Not when he had a rifle that could reach across impossible distances. The doctrine was clear about sniper employment. Patience, single high-value eliminations, weeks-long degradation of enemy morale. What Hathcock was attempting violated every principle. Moving into a fluid battle, engaging multiple targets rapidly, operating without solid intelligence or fire support. 1 staff sergeant, 1 obsolete rifle, trying to break a professional ambush. Burke had voiced the concern everyone felt. Sarge, even if we get there, how do you break 60 NVA with 9 rounds? Hathcock adjusted the white feather tucked into his bush hat and checked Cold Resolve one more time. You don't break 60, you break their certainty. The M1903A4 wasn't supposed to work anymore. The manual said so. The armory had recommended replacement, but Hathcock had learned something the doctrine writers hadn't. Fear has mathematics. At 0512, with dawn bleeding grey light through the triple canopy of Quang Tri's jungle, Hathcock reached his position, a slight elevation 800 meters south of the surrounded patrol. The approach had taken 23 minutes of slow, deliberate movement through terrain most Marines would have called impassable. Burke set up the spotting scope, while Hathcock settled Cold Resolve into the notch of a fallen mahogany trunk. Through the unearthly scope, the tactical picture clarified. NVA soldiers moved in practiced formations around the dried streambed where Rennie's patrol was pinned. Confident, unhurried, interlocking fields of fire, simple, professional, inevitable. Burke counted under his breath. I make it 58, maybe 62. They're staging for a final push. Hathcock tracked movement through the scope, reading the enemy's body language the way another man might read a book. The assault would come at first full light, 0530, maybe 0535. Standard doctrine. Overwhelmed with superior numbers, minimal casualties, quick extraction before American air support could respond. Range to the machine gunner, eastern flank. Burke adjusted the spotting scope. Did the calculations. 812 meters, wind 2 knots, left to right. Hathcock made a tiny adjustment to the scope's windage knob. Cold Resolve's trigger had a clean break at exactly 3 pounds, 2 ounces. He'd measured it himself, filed the sear until it felt like breaking glass. The rifle wasn't supposed to be accurate past 600 meters, according to the manual, but the manual had been written by people who'd never needed to reach across an impossible distance to save 8 lives. The first shot came at 0519. The 168-grain match round took the RPD gunner in the upper chest. He fell backward, and the machine gun clattered into the underbrush. Hathcock worked the bolt with mechanical precision, ejecting the brass, chambering the next round. The entire movement took 1.4 seconds. He'd timed it hundreds of times. What happened next was the first twist. The NVA froze, not scattered, not dove for cover. Froze, because incoming fire from that angle wasn't possible. The terrain didn't allow it. Every tactical manual, every terrain analysis, every experienced officer would have said, no sniper can get an angle from that ridge. But the body was real. The blood was real. Burke's voice was quiet. They don't know where you are. No. They don't know where I can't be. Second shot, 0520, a soldier moving to retrieve the RPD. The round caught him mid-stride. Third shot, 0521, an officer gesturing orders near the western edge. Each shot was deliberate, cold, mathematical. Hathcock wasn't firing to kill maximum targets. He was firing to create questions the enemy couldn't answer. Where is he? How many are there? Why can't we see him? Inside the streambed, Corporal Rennie heard the distant crack of a Springfield and understood instantly. White Feather was out there. The impossible was happening. The medium twist arrived at 0527 when the NVA commander made his critical error. He pulled men from the assault line to search for the sniper. The encirclement loosened. 8 Marines who'd been writing mental letters to families they'd never see again suddenly had firing lanes. Rennie didn't waste the gift. He shifted positions, consolidated fields of fire, prepared for something. Hathcock fired his 4th round at 523, his 5th at 525. Not a blistering rate. Cold resolve demanded precision, and precision required time. But each shot landed true, and each created exponential confusion. The M1903A4's bolt action forced a rhythm that felt too slow for modern warfare. Every sniper school instructor said so. Semi-auto was the future. Bolt guns were obsolete. But Hathcock had discovered something in 3 years of jungle work. Rhythm is a weapon. The predictable interval between shots, 1.4 seconds to work the bolt, 8 to 12 seconds to reacquire and fire, created a mathematical pattern the enemy could almost anticipate. Almost. And then he'd wait 15 seconds, or fire after 6. The unpredictability inside the predictability was maddening. Burke tracked targets through the spotting scope. They're pulling back from the north side. Command element is relocating. Sarge, they're not reinforcing. They're repositioning for withdrawal. Captain Marsh's voice crackled over the radio, monitoring from 3 kilometers south. White Feather, what's your actual count? How many shooters in position? 1 rifle, sir. 9 rounds total, 5 expended. A long pause. Then, explain how 1 rifle is disrupting a company strength element. Hathcock kept his eye to the scope, tracking an officer near the enemy command post. They can't see me, sir, but they can count my shots, and they're doing math they don't like. 6th shot, 0529. The officer dropped. 7th shot, 0532, a soldier attempting to rally the eastern flank. Each round was a word in a sentence the enemy was being forced to read. You are not safe. You are not in control. Someone is hunting you from a direction that shouldn't exist. The big twist came at 0534. The NVA assault, meticulously planned and professionally staged, simply stopped. Not a fighting retreat, not a tactical withdrawal. The enemy commander ordered a full exodus. They'd lost fewer than 10 men, but they'd lost something more critical than bodies, the certainty of overwhelming force. Inside the streambed, Rennie keyed his radio. White Feather, we have movement. Enemy is withdrawing. Say again, enemy is withdrawing. Burke looked at Hathcock, something between disbelief and awe on his face. You broke them with 7 shots. I broke their equation. They thought they knew all the variables. The surrounded patrol extracted at 0611 all 8 men alive. By 0730, they were back at the firebase, drinking coffee that tasted like forgiveness, telling a story nobody would fully believe. Do you think you'd trust the official methods, or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works? Comment which side you'd choose, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The after-action report landed on Captain Marsh's field desk at 1340 hours, typed on a manual Underwood that had seen better wars. Marsh read it twice, then called in Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, the battalion's senior sniper instructor. This says Hathcock broke a coordinated ambush with an M1903, 9 rounds, 8 Marines extracted. Pierce had trained under the Marine Corps' newest sniper doctrine, the one that had phased out the Springfield in favor of the M40. The 03 isn't rated for that kind of precision work past 600 meters, sir, and you can't employ a sniper like that. It violates every principle of... I know what it violates, Gunny. I wrote some of those principles. But Corporal Rennie and 7 other Marines are drinking beer right now instead of being bagged. So either Hathcock got lucky 9 times in 17 minutes, or something in our doctrine is incomplete. Pierce walked down to the firing line at 1500 hours, where Hathcock was cleaning cold resolve. The ritual was meticulous. Cosmoline swabs through the barrel, light oil on the bolt assembly, careful inspection of the firing pin. The rifle was 53 years old, originally manufactured in 1914. It had no business being this accurate. Staff Sergeant, I need to understand what happened this morning. Hathcock didn't look up from his cleaning. I put rounds where they needed to be, Gunny. From 800 meters. With a rifle we tell students is obsolete. The rifle isn't obsolete. The doctrine about what it can do is. Pierce knelt beside the workbench, examining cold resolve. The stock showed wear, careful maintenance, and that hand-carved inscription. The unearthly scope was pristine. Hathcock had clearly spent hours on it, but the rifle itself looked like something from a museum. Walk me through your zero process. Over the next 20 minutes, Hathcock described a system Pierce had never seen documented. Hathcock didn't just zero the rifle to a standard, he zeroed it to himself. His breathing rate, his trigger pull, the exact pressure of his cheek against the stock. He'd fired 3,000 rounds, finding the precise load that worked with this specific barrel's rifling wear pattern. The manual says, use M72 match ammunition, 173 grain. The manual was written for average rifles and average shooters. I'm not using an average rifle. Pierce picked up one of Hathcock's hand-loaded rounds, 168 grain, not 173, a tiny difference. But over 800 meters, tiny differences became the gap between hitting and missing. You're telling me you've reinvented the ballistics for this weapon. I'm telling you I paid attention to what the rifle actually does instead of what it's supposed to do. That evening, Pierce ran his own test. He took a standard-issue M1903A4 to the range, fired at 600 meters using regulation ammunition and doctrine-approved techniques. Groups averaged 4 inches, acceptable for a museum piece. Then he borrowed cold resolve, used Hathcock's hand loads, and applied the breathing technique Hathcock had described. 2-inch groups at 600 meters. At 800 meters, the distance of this morning's engagement, he managed a 4-inch group. Impossible, except it wasn't. The central secret revealed itself 3 days later in the firebase command tent during a routine debrief. Captain Marsh had invited a combat psychologist up from Da Nang, Major Helen Ross, who'd been studying NVA tactical doctrine and morale factors. She'd read the after-action report about the rescued patrol and asked to interview both Hathcock and the NVA prisoners captured near the site. What she discovered was the technical validation nobody expected. Captain, I need to show you something. The prisoners describe what they experienced at 519 hours as Marbantia, ghost sniper. But their description is specific. They counted 9 shots over 17 minutes. They estimated, based on the intervals, that there were between 3 and 5 shooters in concealed positions. Marsh frowned. There was one shooter, Hathcock. I know. But the rhythm of fire convinced them otherwise. A bolt-action rifle creates natural gaps, 1.4 seconds to cycle the action, then variable time to reacquire and fire. The NVA commander interpreted those gaps as multiple shooters coordinating fire. He didn't withdraw because of casualties. He withdrew because he believed he was facing a sniper team in an impossible position. Burke, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, spoke up. The rifle made them see ghosts. Ross nodded. The M1903's mechanical limitations created a psychological effect the M40 couldn't replicate. A semi-auto would have fired faster, more predictably. The enemy would have counted one gun, assessed the threat, and pressed the attack. But the variable rhythm of a bolt gun, combined with Hathcock's deliberate pacing, created ambiguity, and ambiguity in combat multiplies perceived threat. This was the revelation that changed everything. Cold resolve didn't work despite being obsolete. It worked because it was obsolete. The very limitations that made doctrine writers phase it out, slow rate of fire, manual operation, careful shot placement, became tactical advantages when wielded by someone who understood the mathematics of fear. Hathcock had known this, though he'd never articulated it in psychological terms. He'd simply observed that when he fired the M40, enemies counted one gun and adapted. When he fired the Springfield, enemies counted wrong and hesitated. Hesitation in a dawn ambush was death. Gunny Pierce sat in the back of the tent, quietly rewriting 3 years of sniper instruction in his head. So the doctrine is wrong. We're teaching snipers to maximize firepower when we should be teaching them to maximize psychological impact. Not wrong, Gunny. Incomplete. Marsh looked at the after-action report again, seeing it differently now. How many other tools have we discarded because they don't fit the current doctrine? Nobody answered. The question hung in the tent like cordite smoke. That night, Hathcock sat on his bunk, cleaning cold resolve one more time. The rifle didn't care about doctrine. It didn't care about being obsolete. It just sent bullets where the mathematics said they'd go, and sometimes the mathematics of fear mattered more than the mathematics of firepower. Burke brought coffee, sat beside him. Ross says you reinvented sniper psychology. I just paid attention to what worked. They're going to change the training because of you. Hathcock ran an oiled cloth down the barrel one more time. Maybe. Or maybe they'll write a new manual and forget why it matters. The final twist came 6 weeks later, when Gunny Pierce submitted his revised training proposal to Marine Corps headquarters. The document was careful, technical, grounded in Ross's psychological analysis and Pierce's ballistics testing. It recommended maintaining M1903A4 variants in the sniper inventory for specific tactical applications, not as primary weapons, but as psychological force multipliers in situations where enemy doctrine expected modern equipment. The proposal was quietly buried, not because it was wrong, not because the data was flawed, but because admitting that an obsolete rifle could outperform current doctrine meant admitting that 3 years of expensive training and equipment modernization had missed something fundamental. Institutional pride has its own mathematics, and those equations rarely favor those who prove the experts incomplete. Corporal Rennie rotated home in August 1967. He carried a photograph of his daughter and a story he'd tell the rest of his life about the sniper who broke an ambush with a rifle that wasn't supposed to work. He'd visit Hathcock's memorial decades later and leave a white feather at the base, saying nothing, remembering everything. Burke made sergeant, then staff sergeant, eventually becoming a sniper instructor himself. He taught the doctrine, but in private sessions with students who seemed ready, he described the morning in Quang Tri province when one rifle rewrote the rules quietly, without permission. because lives mattered more than regulations. Captain Marsh retired in 1972, carrying the after-action report in his personal files. Years later, asked about the evolution of Marine sniper doctrine, he'd pause, then say, "Sometimes the best innovations come from people willing to ignore what we teach them. The hard part is building institutions humble enough to learn from that." Major Ross published her findings in a military psychology journal in 1969. The article, "Temporal Rhythm and Threat Perception in Combat Decision-Making," was cited in 3 dissertations and forgotten by everyone except a few graduate students who'd never fired a rifle. The second big twist was quieter, slower. Across firebase perimeters in Quang Tri province, among snipers who'd heard the story third-hand or fourth-hand, a handful of M1903A4 rifles stayed in rotation. Not officially, not in the manuals, just in the hands of men who'd learned that sometimes obsolete just means misunderstood, and that doctrine is a starting point, not a ceiling. Hathcock continued using cold resolve until 1969, when burns from a vehicle fire ended his field career. The rifle was cleaned one final time, tagged, and sent to storage. It now rests in the National Museum of the Marine Corps, the words "Cold Resolve" still visible on the stock. Museum visitors pass it daily, reading the placard about sniper equipment evolution, never knowing that this specific rifle had proven that fear, properly calibrated, has more range than any bullet. Decades later, in an interview Hathcock gave before his death in 1999, he was asked about the morning he saved 8 Marines with 9 shots. It wasn't heroism, it was simple trigonometry. You find the angle nobody thinks exists, and you work the problem. The rifle doesn't care about doctrine, it just sends the bullet where the math says it'll go. And sometimes, that's enough. The interviewer pressed, did he think he'd changed sniper doctrine? Hathcock smiled, small and tired. I think I reminded people that doctrine is written by humans, and humans are wrong more often than we admit. The scary part isn't being wrong, it's needing to be right so badly that you can't see what's actually working. Cold resolve sits behind museum glass now, cleaned and preserved, an artifact of a war and a skill most people will never understand. But among Marine snipers, especially those who've faced impossible tactical mathematics, the story persists, not as legend, not as doctrine, just as quiet proof that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, trust their hands and eyes, and let cold resolve do what fear and regulation never can. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.